What's going on, everyone? This week with Conspiracy Corner. I'm wearing shades not to look cool, but because I actually have a sty. I would show it to you, but I don't want to gross the audience out. And I haven't had a sty, Brian, for, God, I don't know, since I was 12.
Oh, God.
And I forgot how much they actually hurt. Well, appreciate everyone watching, appreciate everyone listening. I know this week we decided to kind of step away from the whole, I guess, gross topics. God, I feel like I've been hit. I feel like I've been in a boxing match. I'm like so freaking swollen right now. It's hard to, maybe I'm just self-conscious about it. But anyway, I know this week we wanted to talk about giants and giants roaming the earth. And it's interesting when you start looking and you start researching any of these topics. It's fascinating because you start to find more and more and more information that really makes you stop and wonder what was going on the planet back in the day. But I'll let you start off, Brian. What did you find with your research on the giants?
Well, I have to concur with what Wes just said on a lot of this stuff. I've been really keeping up with it as it's been coming out, and when I was doing research for this show, I once again found like 4 or 5 more things that I hadn't even found previously and had no idea. And, this just connects all over the place. And one of the places that it connects is in, as we started out talking about Phil Schneider and genetic manipulation experiments, and that got us to the Unit 731. This one is about giants, but it also ties in with genetic experiments, eugenics, and basically polluting the DNA of the creatures on Earth. So there's your common thread through all of this sort of stuff. And I think the best way to approach it is to go back to like the earliest sources where they talk about giants, and in this case that would be the Book of Giants, which was recovered just back in the 20th century from the Dead Sea Scrolls. They got scraps of a lot of versions of this thing, but none of them are completely intact, so they got fragments. So these were all found at one place. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in a cave about a mile inland from the Dead Sea in between 1946 and 52 at Khirbet Qumran on the West Bank. There's between 825 and 870 separate scrolls in this find, and like I said, most of them are fragmentary. According to these, and specifically the Book of Giants, there were 200 fallen angels, also called watchers in some traditions, who came to Earth and performed quote-unquote unnatural acts on humans and animals. The offspring of the watchers and humans were the Nephilim, or giants, and sometimes called the men of renown. These were the hybrids between the fallen angels having relations with human women, like it says in the Bible, Genesis, and then the offspring of that became these giants and men of renown. They were apparently the first generation ones were just ginormously huge, and then as generations went on beyond that, they got progressively smaller and smaller if they were inbreeding with humans. The other thing,
it made me wonder, I don't mean to cut you off, it makes me wonder if some of the women actually died in childbirth, giving birth to these monsters, because they had to come out big.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think they would come out bigger than your normal human being.
Absolutely. Yeah, it of course doesn't say anything about that, but it's possible that the people that were writing the stories just didn't know what was happening to them. Some of them, it says that the human women were their wives, so you got to wonder what that was all about, but we just don't have that kind of specific information on it. So, yeah, I guess the other issue here is that they weren't just interfering with human genetic line and polluting that, but it says also in the Book of Giants that they were interfering with, quote, all that grew, fruit of the earth, grains, trees, fish, beasts, reptiles, so on and so forth, long list. And the outcome of all of this, together with their hybriding of humans, was, of course, violence, perversion, and a brood of monstrous beings, not only giants, but horrific chimeras as well. And this is mentioned in the Bible in Genesis 6:4. And it goes over that again and again in the Book of Giants. where when the giants are having a meeting, it talks about the monsters were there also. Well, the monsters aren't the fallen angels, and they're not the giants. What are they talking about?
Yeah, probably some of the freaks of nature that the dragons and all the other weird stuff you hear about.
Exactly.
And
if you've got the kind of power to have genetic manipulation, if you've got that kind of science on hand and you want to do things, if you're like 30 feet tall, go ahead, make a monster that's big enough to eat a human. What's it going to do to you? Nothing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, too, as you look back, and I'm sure you're going to get into some of this, but as you look back historically speaking, I know we talked about Gilgamesh or Nimrod, whatever you guys want to call him. I always wondered for the longest time why the Bible depicted him as, someone God hated, someone God just despised. And it was more than just he was a dick. As you read some of these other literature on him, he was a giant. He was a freak of nature.
Yep.
And that's why. And it's when I had Gary Wayne on the show, I know some of the people liked that show, some of the people didn't like the show. But for the longest time, I'd always wonder, when you read about God, for instance, in Genesis through the Old Testament, he kind of seems like this old grumpy sociopath, alcoholic. I mean, the worst of the worst, because he just is so angry when they go into the land of Canaan. He says, "Wipe everyone out, women, children, beasts, wipe them all out," and he is merciless when he does it. And I always wondered for the longest time, God, why was God so merciless? Like Jericho, the people of Jericho were terrified of the Israelites. They wanted nothing to do with the Israelites. Mm-hmm. And God went in, and every man, woman, child, beast of the field was wiped out. And so you see these giants appear before the flood and after the flood. But it goes beyond even that. As I was researching this, like the Egyptian and some of the paintings that they have, it's giants building the pyramids. And it's so obvious they're giants because they show normal human beings next to these freaks. And you see it in the Sumerian culture, you see it in the Aztec culture, you see it in the Native American culture, even Wild Bill or Buffalo Bill. What was it? William Cody Case. I put it up on the blog. He wrote in his biography about a Native American talking to him about these red-headed giants, how they would run with the buffalo and just scoop them right up in their arms, which sounds crazy until you see the stone carving of Gilgamesh holding a lion in his arms like a little kitten.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to go off on a rampage on you.
No, you're absolutely right, though.
I'm like, giants!
Giants are cool. Yeah, that I know the carving that you're talking about, and that is a full-grown lion. You can look at the carving, and it's got a mane on it. It's not some little kitten or something. He's holding a full-grown lion up. So, yeah, that gives you the proportion and scale. And Gilgamesh and Nimrod, according to historical researchers and archaeologists and whatnot, are starting to think that they were the same person because they're given sort of the same, Uruk was built by Nimrod, well, supposedly also built by Gilgamesh. Babylon, the Tower of Babel, was built by Nimrod, but also supposedly by Gilgamesh. So, there's sort of these people are thinking that they're the same person. And Gilgamesh is also supposed to have been one of those, I think it was a second generation, either first or second generation hybrid with the fallen ones, the Watchers. So he had that same bloodline going on too. Now you're talking about the giants being all over the place. Well, let's go back for a minute now. The giants had polluted the earth with their DNA. They had managed to get their DNA into most of the human bloodlines. They had tampered with all the animals and everything. And some people even think this includes things like dinosaurs not actually being natural animals, but being manipulated with by the Nephilim and made into these, giant monsters due to their DNA manipulations. So God says, okay, that's it. The only way I can deal with this is to take the few animals and people that still have, clean DNA with them, put them all on the ark and save them. So Noah, go ahead, make this big ark, take care of this whole project, and then I'm going to flood the world and kill them. Well, meanwhile, on the giant side, according to the Book of Giants, they're actually getting warnings about this. Some of the Titans, which are what they were calling the first generation hybrids, were having dreams and stuff about this. And one of them, one of the Nephilim, named Mahwe, he was a Titan's son of Barakel, had a vision of a stone tablet being immersed in water. When it was drawn forth again, all the names on it were gone except 3 names. And this is taken as a prophecy of something bad that was happening. And then another giant, Oya, also had a disturbing dream. This one about a tree being uprooted and tipped over, and only 3 of the roots still holding it to the ground. So they decide that they need to get a hold of the most famous prophet and dream interpreter that they can find, who in this case happens to be Enoch, who's the great-grandfather of Noah. And Enoch at this point isn't even on the earth. He's after his 365 years, and it says in the Bible that God took him. It doesn't say he died. So he's gone somewhere. And Mahwe has to actually fly to wherever it is that he's gone to go find him and get this dream interpreted. And Enoch doesn't come back with him, but through intermediaries he sends a tablet that's got God's verdict on it. And Enoch tells them that it's a warning from God to repent or be destroyed, including the Watchers' wives and all of their offspring. Now, at this point, apparently they don't do enough repenting, because shortly after that, God sends down 4 archangels to go after him: Michael, Gabriel, Israel, and Raphael. And the first thing they do is they trick one of the giants into stealing one of the other giants' wives, and sets off a war between the giants, and a lot of them wipe each other out. Then after that, the giants have wiped most of each other out. The big flood happens and wipes out presumably the remainder of them. Except, if you look at the Bible, it says there were giants in the earth in those days. It doesn't say on the earth. It says in the earth. This is an important point, because Noah and his daughters and their husbands, that whole family, there's one of them, I think Ham was the one that's got some Nephilim pollution in his bloodline, but they're pretty much pure otherwise. They're, don't have any of that DNA pollution on them. But somehow the giants again appear after the flood, and according to the other apocryphal books, it was Og of Bashan who had survived it somehow. And my guess is by being underground, because giants live in the earth. He just happened to be down there when the flood happened. He was the only one that survived it. He comes out again, according to these sources that say he lived for 5,000 years. So he was the one that began repopulating the giants in Canaan. Bashan is in Canaan. So by the time after all this other stuff happened and the Jews finally got to Canaan, this area had been entrenched with giants living there for centuries. They had completely taken over this area. And so when God sent the Israelites in there to take over that area, it was not only promised to them, but he also had the ulterior motive of, well, here's the last spot where giants are on earth that survived the flood, wipe them out. And since they've had animals and all this other stuff around, wipe them out too, because they polluted the DNA on that, more than likely. They like to tamper with DNA, wipe them out too. So what's the next thing that happens? Well, then you start getting these reports, historical reports and archives from there being giants on Sardinia, which apparently was their next stop. Then they went into Europe. Everywhere that you find these giant mounds and megaliths, if you talk to the locals, they'll say, well, we didn't make them, the giants built them. And of course, the modern day archaeologists and whatnot say, well, that's ridiculous. There were no giants. This is just some culture that was around before that they have no record or remaining, racial knowledge of, no passed down legends about or anything, so they don't know about them. So they're just saying the giants built it. Well, no, what if giants actually built it? Because they're big enough to move these giant stones around with no effort at all, and with what would be just about impossible for us with Stone Age technology. And according to even the archaeologists, the megaliths in Europe and in the Mediterranean are older the further south that you go. So they started out around the Mediterranean and moved north. So then you get up into the lands where you've got the frozen Arctic lands of the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Danes, the Finns, who all have this legendary about Odin and Thor and everything, and their legends talk about the frost giants that they were warring with. Well, what are the frost giants like? Well, they've got blue eyes, they've got white skin, and they've got long red hair. And they're extremely fierce. Right. They kill humans and they eat them. So what's the next thing that you see? Indian legends from North America about the white-skinned, red-haired giants that were running around eating people. And these were all the same people that were building the mounds over here. And then it goes into South America. As soon as the Israelites went after them over there, what was left, and probably the ones that had left before that, had already spread all over the world. So these things had gone everywhere at that point, and once again, there are giants in the earth.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really, really interesting, especially, for the longest time. When I grew up, they used to say that the flood didn't happen. It's impossible. I remember scientists in the 80s saying that. There's no evidence of a global flood. And now all of a sudden there's evidence of a global flood. And the same thing with these giants. All of a sudden you start looking at historical accounts, from about 1880 to about 1930 something. There is newspaper articles of people digging up giants, even here in North America, digging them up, farmers digging them up.
Yeah.
And from about I would say early 40s, somewhere around that time, someone put the kibosh on the whole thing. Either people quit digging them up or someone was kind of silencing people digging up these giants. But you can read these accounts, account after account after account. And what's interesting is even in the Middle East, you can read accounts of farmers digging up these huge, gigantic bones.
Yep.
And it's worldwide. And it's hard for us to believe that there was a worldwide flood, but I think pre-flood, what we assume to be our human history probably isn't even close to what was actually going on and the technology that was going on. And that, the Europeans, weren't, well, the Native Americans probably weren't the first one here on North America. It's probably these giants running around because you hear farmers digging these things up.
Yeah.
And even today, you and I have talked about mountain giants. And I've spoken with a couple people that have claimed to have seen these mountain giants. And they describe them as way out of proportions for Sasquatch, too big to be a Sasquatch. And then the features they mention sound human. But just the size is just so far out that it's hard to place it. What is your take on some of these modern-day mountain giant stories? Do you think it's the Nephilim?
I'm not sure if they're directly related because the description is off a little bit. One thing that we should post is a picture that they accidentally got of apparently a giant in the forest over in Bulgaria, where this group of students were just marching up this mountain, and somebody took a picture of the students, and way off in the background, they've got this thing in the shot. There's like 2 or 3 pictures right in sequence where you can see this thing in the background. And again, it looks like about 20 feet tall. It's built more or less like a basketball player. And that's the description for most of the red-haired giants over here in North America was 7 to 9 feet. Now, if you want a great reference book on this, free plug here, The Giants That Ruled America and the Smithsonian Cover-Up by Dewhurst. This is the book on this whole subject. Nice and thick. First 150 pages is nothing but reprints from old newspaper articles here in the U.S. of giant bones being recovered and the people doing the studies on them, taking measurements of how big they were and where they were found and the whole thing. And then, of course, all the stories end with, and then the people from the Smithsonian came and took the bones away for further study. Case after case after case after case, 150 pages of it. And that's all they just bothered to get. I'm sure there's more. So, yeah, the Smithsonian, according to these guys, and I totally believe this, since they do work for the government, don't want anything contradicting the theory of evolution and everything that modern science runs on. So they're more than happy to go ahead, and they've had this policy in place. I'd have to read the book again. It's got the name of the specific Smithsonian director that started all of this in the late 1800s. And basically after that point, it was like, if you find giant bones or anything, get them, bring them here, and, whatever happens after that point, we don't know. But they're never seen again, and they always say, oh, we lost them, and, or they dumped them in the Atlantic, whatever. It doesn't jive with the story that they want to put out. And that isn't just here in the U.S. That's in lots of other places around the world where they're sort of tied into that whole academic scientific community. Because anything, like, oh, you found a giant, you guys are crazy, you're not even scientists, ha ha ha. And, everybody's got that attitude. So if they're going to be working together with the other academic scientists from around the world, they sort of got the same goofball attitude that anything they find that's outside the range of what we find acceptable and believable has to be discarded. Or automatically we're going to say it's a hoax.
Yeah, I think there is some sort of a cover-up going on. It's kind of like, and most people tend to forget this, but before 9/11 happened, what was it, the day before 9/11 happened, they were like, hey, by the way, there's a whole bunch of missing money, and we don't know what happened to it. And it was a very large sum of missing money.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden 9/11 happens, and no one ever talks about it again. And what's interesting is I didn't realize they had found Nimrod's tomb in Iraq. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is actually pretty stunning. As of April 23rd, 2003, they reported on the BBC that they had found the tomb of Nimrod, who was also Gilgamesh, and the founder of Uruk. And because they had found through satellite magnetic ground anomaly mapping, they had found the actual ruins of Uruk. And they went there and started digging around, and they were trying to figure out where the Euphrates had formerly run, because it ran right next to or through the town. And when they found the former course of the Euphrates, it occurred to them that according to the description of where he had been buried, that when Nimrod/Gilgamesh finally died and they buried him, they diverted the course of the river, buried him under the Euphrates, and then re-diverted it back to where it flowed, so nobody could get to his tomb. It was underneath the Euphrates. Well, that was 5,000 years ago. So he's gone. The Euphrates has changed course and isn't there anymore. So once they figured out where it was easy enough to dig in there. And if I got right here, within 1 month of the time that they dug in there, 2003, a German expedition found it, and John Fassbender of the Bavarian Department of Historical Monuments in Munich is the one that said the tomb matched the description of the last resting place of Gilgamesh. So at this point, now we have to go into some stuff that Steve Quayle likes to talk about. And he claims that part of the reason that we had the Gulf War invasion of Iraq was for a cover story, because the name Iraq, by the way, came from the word Uruk, which was the city that Nimrod/Gilgamesh founded. One of the primary objectives and reasons for us being there is that they had opened up his tomb, and that they figured that he still had some of this ancient technology hidden in his tomb, and also he was the Nephilim giant, so they wanted to get his remains to hide it from the outside world science, and also so they could probably get DNA from it, because that's, first or second generation Nephilim right there. So if, they didn't have giants already available, they can bring them back that way. And the other thing that's kind of hilarious is Bush saying, well, we got to go over into Iraq because there's weapons of mass destruction there. It could be nuclear, biological, or chemical. Yeah, well, it's biological and it's a Nephilim DNA. There's your weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes you wonder what they're going to do with it. We have the technology for DNA, and we've talked about it on past shows. We don't have to go into it again, but the amount of DNA testing they're doing, genetics they're doing, and experiments they're doing, I think would shock most of the general public on what's actually going on.
I think a lot of people actually think we're a lot more protected from this than what we actually are. When I was doing research for this, I found out that the U.S. Patent Office has actually issued a patent for creating chimeras. That's right, half human, half animal DNA hybrids. Somebody's got a patent for it. That's public sector, buddy, if they got a patent for it. What is the military and everybody else doing with it? Because they've had it for 30, 40 years at least.
Yeah. And, like I said, and that's been protected. Chimeras are protected in Europe right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes you wonder what is going on. It's kind of like that whole Nephilim that was killed in Afghanistan, where the soldiers went in and they kept saying this thing was eating soldiers. Well, they finally chased it to a cave and lit the thing up. And there's several witnesses that saw this thing, said it was this huge giant that ate people. This is modern day too. This isn't something from biblical records. This just happened a couple years back, didn't it?
Yeah, this is the Afghan war here just recently. Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of things that are hidden in plain sight are sort of, even the people that are like staunchly Christian that know the Bible inside and out, I don't think have a really clear idea of how much talk there is of the giants and the Nephilim bloodlines in there. And I can give you guys an example. There's actually 21 giants are spoken of by name in the Bible, including Og of Bashan. Now Og's father was named Ogias, and the actual real name of the Book of Giants is in fact Book of Ogias. And in the Western English, Ogias has been brought down and translated to us as the word ogre. So technically, for our way of thinking, modern English, it would be direct translation, Book of Ogres. What do ogres do? They're monsters that eat people, okay? King Nimrod, again, is another one of the giants. Now, a lot of this isn't directly in the Bible because they took out some of these books when they made the whole canon back in the 3rd century, with Constantine forcing them to do it. And they left out some of the stuff that relates to giants. So when you read the Bible, you get the names of all these different tribes and peoples that the Israelites were having conflicts with, but you don't realize that some of the stuff behind the conflicts has to do with their bloodline. Let me give you some examples. All of these different tribes and peoples that they mention in the following list all have Nephilim blood in them or are pure-blooded Nephilim. Okay? Amalekites, Amorites, Anakims, Ashtathites, Avims, Avites, Canaanites, Caphtorims, Ekronites, Emims, Eshkelonites, Gazathites, Geshurites, Gibeonites, Giblites, Girgashites, Gittits, Hittites, Hivites, Horims, Horites, Jebusites, Cadmonites, Kenites, Kenizzites, Maachinites, Manassites, Nephilim, Perizzites, Philistines, Rephaim, Sidonians, Zamzumins, Zebushites, and Zuzims. That's 35 tribes. So giants are all over the damn place in the Bible if you know what you're looking at.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's, like I said before, you always thought that God was just kind of reckless and kind of angry, and but and it's in the ones you mentioned, like the Amorites, all the Hittites. These people just kind of magically show up after the flood. That's the other thing too.
Yeah,
is everything in the Bible is bloodline based. Enoch, all the way down to Methuselah, all the way to Noah, all the way to Abraham. Everything's bloodline. You can figure out where someone came from. And after the flood, there was no one. It was Noah and his sons. But what's interesting is all these other tribes start showing up. All these other people start showing up. And they never really explain where they came from. And so it makes me wonder, it says in the end of days, it'll be like the days of Noah. It makes me wonder if we're going to start seeing this more and more and more and more. These things start reappearing like they were back in the day.
Yeah, genetically created monstrosities. Now, the other thing to think about, too, is that, like you were saying, that's one thing that always kind of threw me, too. In the Old Testament, God's like this big meanie, and then all of a sudden Jesus comes along, and he's a God of love and peace and wants everybody to get along. It's like, what, did he mellow out after he had a kid, or what's going on here? And it's like that had nothing to do with it. He's the same God the whole time. What it was just this bloodline of these monsters that were created by the fallen angels. And the fallen angels, of course, work for the devil, God's enemy. So he doesn't want the devil's people to take over his creation, his world. He's trying to wipe them out. And he was using the Israelites as his instrument for doing that in some of these cases. And, letting them basically work for what they're, here's a beautiful land, go wipe out these nasty giants, you can have it. we can't fight these guys. We're like the size of crickets compared to them. Don't worry, I'll teach you some good methods of getting rid of them. Whatever. They don't talk about that, but they ended up winning it. But the other thing to think about now is the Tower of Babel. We get back to Nimrod, Gilgamesh. Supposedly, he's the guy that was building this. They were making this tall tower so that they could ascend into the heavens and be with God. Well, we know from modern day that if you build really tall towers, God isn't going to come down and smite you. I mean, when we built the Twin Towers in New York, God didn't have like a hissy fit and come down and throw a lightning bolt at him. So it didn't have anything to do with the height of the building. What I think they were actually talking about here is that, again, there was this fallen angel technology involved, and they were making some kind of a Stargate inside of this huge building so that they could go to different places that God didn't want them going to. And so that's why he came down and went, well, that's it for that experiment. We're going to make the tower fall down. We're going to make everybody have different languages so they all go wander around somewhere else and don't talk to each other and organize anymore, because they're just getting to be too much of a problem here. And, again, one of the reasons for wiping out the giants.
It's interesting that I know that sounds like crazy talk to a lot of people, but if you read like the Book of Enoch, what was interesting about the Book of Enoch, and they don't even really explain it that well in the Book of Enoch, but the fallen angels go back to Enoch and they say, hey, for some reason God seems to like you. Can you go before God? And
right. They want him to intercede on their behalf.
Yeah,
they know he's
grease the wheels.
Yeah, they know he's like really tight with God. They're like, like that.
But what's interesting is there was somewhere in that conversation he was having with these fallen angels, and he was saying, "How can I go before God?" And they were saying, "We'll show you how to go before God." And he ended up before God. He ended up, I think, somewhere in the Book of Enoch. He's somewhere in heaven. And they don't really explain how he gets there, but, an angel comes to him and was like, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. And he has to speak to God. And so it makes you wonder if there were, I think all these stories, and I hate to go too much into the Bible because I know some people really curse that, but like the book of Adam and Eve, it's very, very fascinating to read the book of Adam and Eve. The whole story. They talk about this light being on their body like clothes. So the whole Stargate stuff, I don't think that it's with that technology. I hate to sound like Matthew Johnson, but I think when you start getting wrapped up with these fallen angels and you start getting wrapped up with these evil entities, they have power and they have technology based way beyond anything and we could imagine.
Right.
And that's why I think the pre-flood world was a very technology advanced world. You're right. There's no reason for God to destroy. What was it Nimrod was building?
The Tower of
Babel.
Yeah.
There was no reason for it. But all of a sudden he wipes it out. And the one thing he said that always stuck with me is if you read in the Bible, and also Sumerian texts talk about it too as well, God said there's nothing they couldn't accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once they got a Stargate, they can pretty much go anywhere and gather up any technology and cause any kind of problem. Right,
and that always stuck with me. There's nothing they can't accomplish. Well, what is he talking about there? Mm-hmm. What do you mean there's nothing they can't accomplish? So it makes you wonder what technology they have.
There's so much of this stuff that they just go right over it so fast, like where it talks about the one passage about giants in Genesis, and then that's pretty much it. There's some little passages after that. I mean, if you guys want to go actually try and find them, 2 Samuel 21, Genesis 6, 1 Chronicles 20, Deuteronomy 1:28. I mean, there's some of the places in the Bible where they mention giants, but it's like they don't go in depth on some of this stuff. And if you read some of the apocryphal books that were included in the canon, all these books tie together. They've all got a little piece of the story in it. Like you're talking about Enoch somehow getting in front of God. Well, if you read the Book of Giants, Mahweh went to find Enoch and said, please intercede, go talk to God, see what's going on. And again, like you said in the Book of Enoch, he goes, I don't know how to get there. How do I go talk to God? Oh, I'll show you. Well, yeah, he flew there with them, basically, took him there. And that's why the angel said, what are you doing here? How'd you get here?
Yeah. And it's just that the whole thing fascinates me, and the whole story of the giants fascinate me, and today we call it Ancient Aliens, or if you ever watch the History Channel, they call it Ancient Aliens. I guess it's more of a new age term, or for people who don't read the Bible or take the time to read any of these other books, it's easier to say, well, it's aliens. But you're right, and even in the Bible, it mentions by name, like the book of Jasper, or the book of, there's another one they mention. But there's stuff taken out of all these apocryphal books that are actually in the Bible. And if people get a chance, read the book of Enoch. It's probably one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, because he describes, I think there's a reason why they didn't include it in the Bible. And the reason is this: names are very important in the Bible, if you notice that.
Yep.
When they mention someone by name, it's of great importance that they're mentioning that name. In the book of Enoch, he names off the fallen angels. And I think that's why it wasn't included in the original canons, because names are important. They, you don't want to make them infamous. You don't want to make them famous. You know what I mean?
Well, and the other thing is, too, names allow you to have control. As you read the whole story of Solomon, he got this magic ring from God that let him control these demons. So as soon as he found out what their names were and what the specifics on the summing conjuration of them were, he could call these things up and command them to do things, which, according to the story, he did, to build temples and all sorts of things. He just made them do the dirty work. Which is kind of a dirty trick. But along the same lines, you don't want any of these lesser magicians to get the names of one of these things, summon it up, and then not be able to control it and have it go loose and start destroying everything. Now, remember, part of the story from the Book of Giants is that after the 200 fallen ones came down here and started having human wives and making hybrids, their punishment was that they would watch the deaths of their wives and their children. And what happened is they were imprisoned in the earth. So all 200 of them are imprisoned in the earth. And they were supposed to be there, which, watching the demise of their wives and children. It means even though they're in prison, they still have the psychic powers to be able to astrally project or see what's going on the surface or whatever. But they just can't get out and be loose. Which makes me wonder about if there's any tie-in with things like CERN. Are they trying to find the particles that created the universe, or are they trying to open the gates to let these things loose again? There's some people that do stuff on that, too, and that's another really creepy conspiracy.
Well, the interesting part about the Book of Giants, or with the whole story, is they were bound to the earth for 70 generations.
Right.
And what the heck does that mean? And then they'd be let loose. And what's the 70 generations mean? And the other thing that ties into it is the deep underground bases we were talking about, or what was going on in Antarctica, when they went and did the expedition. That was just on the History Channel the other day when you and I were talking about Antarctica. There was something weird going on there. They sent that expedition. This is way off topic, but they sent this expedition to Antarctica.
Operation High Jump, 1946.
You speak of the resources of Antarctica. What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole, in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Our distinguished guest was Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
Why did the Allies under Admiral Byrd mount an invasion of the Antarctic?
Having seen the film that was made in 1947 with Admiral Byrd and Admiral Wood, I had the opportunity to actually see portions of this film, and what struck me was the fact that there was a significant military contingent that went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. Why was it necessary to bring some 4,000 soldiers, a battleship, an aircraft carrier, and a support team to go into an area if it was purely geological/geophysical exploration. Clearly, there were other unknown factors there, and it was up to the Americans to see if they could acquire this missing technology. That is one scenario.
After a few days, however, and the loss of an undisclosed number of aircraft, the operation was abruptly terminated. What happened? What mysterious opponent could have repelled the Allied invasion so quickly and decisively? Could it have been the few remaining members of the German armed forces?
It is clear that under the structures of ice, there are many layers of civilization, suggesting at one earlier point of time when the conditions of the South Pole were different. Clearly, there was some type of civilization there. This, of course, is assuming that the shell of the Earth had a different north and south magnetic pole. And with the shifting of the pole, this region became suddenly very, very frigid. And thus, we do not see any evidences on the surface of these so-called earlier conditions of intelligence. However, I believe with the further exploration of the documents that both Admiral Byrd brought to the attention of the world after World War II, and the Brazilian Navy uncovered in 1961 with its subpole expedition, that extraterrestrial intelligence is also operated out of the area of the South Pole.
They had a naval armada of 5,000 men, including Australian and British ships. They also had Admiral Nimitz, and the overall commander was Admiral Byrd, who was a polar expert. Why do you send something like that to the South Pole to do,
an expedition?
Yeah. Biggest expedition ever mounted to the South Pole, and it's all naval military. What?
What worries me, though, is when you start reading, like, the Phil Snyder stories. They're going down how many miles into the earth and running into these weird beings. It ties back and makes you wonder if they're running into the stuff pre-Noah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and then there's other weird tie-ins with that, too. I was just looking at a video the other day where they've been doing subsurface satellite imaging of the actual land underneath the giant ice cap in Antarctica, and taking a look at what's underneath it. And they're finding structures there. And this is like under 1.5 miles, 2 miles of ice. So either that was actually there before this whole ice sheet came and covered up the area, which according to modern science is ridiculous and impossible. But there it is. So either they're completely wrong about how old Antarctica is and how long it's been covered with ice, or somebody else has gotten underneath the ice and made a civilization underneath there, which ties in with the whole weird story of Base 211 at the South Pole and Admiral Dönitz of the German Navy crowing about them having actually built an impregnable fortress for the Fuhrer in a Shangri-La where no one can get to them. There you go.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really got me is they were showing these subsurface scans, and I'm looking at them and I'm going, oh my God, that's a swastika. There's a perfect swastika there.
Really?
Yep.
That's interesting.
It's creepy, man.